Hello, my name is John Mugno, and I will be your host for today's Rye Brook focused discussion on the recent court decision that removed some limits on airline companies not using the main passenger terminal at Westchester County Airport. My guests today are two Rye Brook residents, Paul Noto and Peter Schlachtis. Paul is an attorney and part of the team that represented the aircraft charter companies in this matter. He has also served as our county legislator. Peter is a longtime activist on airport issues who recently left the County Airport Advisory Board after many years of service and who serves as chair of the Rye Brook Airport Advisory Board. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you, John.
This is a complicated topic, and I thought our viewers might appreciate a short summary. The legal action directly involved two carriers, JSX and XO Global, who both operate passenger flights out of facilities that are separate from the main passenger terminal. These separate facilities are called fixed base operators, or FBOs, and they account for about 80% of the flights at Westchester. The main passenger terminal restricts the maximum number of embarking and disembarking passengers per half hour, excluding certain holiday periods. The county codified these restrictions by passing the 2004 Terminal Use Procedures Law that was agreed with the carriers using the main passenger terminal and the Federal Aviation Administration. The 2000 law reinforced the 1985 out-of-court settlement with the carriers that is known as the Midway Stipulation. So basically, we've seen legal things occur by the county over a now 40-year period. The county in 2005, however, amended the 2000 law and required all passenger service to be provided at the main terminal, but it did not have the carriers or the FAA approve the amendment. The amendment limited flights from the FBOs to carrying 9 passengers or less. JSX and XO Global began operations using the FBO facilities in 2015, 10 years later. The county began to enforce the 2005 amendment in 2021, and the carriers using the FBO facilities objected. This objection was upheld by the courts in late August. Let me ask you, Paul, if that's a reasonable summary account in ordinary language of what transpired.
Yes, I think you gave a very good, description. I know it can be a little complicated and you get into some of the, the finer points of, terms like ANCA, the Airport Noise and Capacity Act, and the laws that apply. But I think for people who live near the airport, one thing, those of us who have been involved in these issues over the years, we've learned that the county doesn't have as much control as we would like, at least some of us would like, and the FAA pretty much, runs the show. So the county, things the county can't do, like have a mandatory curfew on flights and things of that, just shut down the airport, things of that nature. And I know it gets frustrating for people who live around the airport. And so, yeah, I mean, in this case, these are smaller carriers. They do not have a lot of flights running in and out for a lot of reasons, economics being the main one. So I'm not sure anyone would know the difference between, let's say, a corporate jet coming in and out or a JSX or an XO unless they saw a marking on the tail. So it's, I think that's a good description of what happened and keeping in mind, a lot of this goes back to 2004 and 2005 when the county first codified the Midway settlement, and then in 2005 they amended it, and it was that amendment that was the focus of the lawsuits by the small carriers.
Right. Peter, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, again, I agree with Paul. You did a nice job summing up the basics. I want to congratulate Paul, you and your firm on your successful appeal. It should be noted that the county pursued this litigation and attempted to um, get the operators in question to fall in line with the need to use the main terminal and abide by the rather unique limitations that we enjoy on airline traffic in and out of the airport for several years, and was diligent and quite successful until it got to the appeals level. Um, and so but it was decided, and our understanding is that that's as far as the legal process is going to go. So we're going to live with this decision and its consequences. And I think that's important here to frame what's at stake. So essentially, what we have is, as a neighbor, is a county airport in a crowded metropolitan area that where traditionally airlines and other operators have pushed in all kinds of ways for greater access and greater use of the airport, to relieve the strain on other major airports in the area like LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. And the county airport is already I think the third busiest airport, in the state. And it lies directly adjacent to the Kensico Reservoir, which provides drinking water to our town, our village, much of Westchester, and virtually all of New York City. Millions of people depend on that clean drinking water. And needless to say, there would be no question that a industrial facility like the airport could be built in the proximity of this reservoir today, or any time in the last 30 or 40 years. But the airport dates back to before World War II. And so the county's, to its credit, the county's longstanding position has been, the airport exists. We want to be a good neighbor. We want to operate it as a good neighbor, and we're going to operate it with the goal of non-expansion. So the airport is not going to grow, and we're not going to grow facilities at the airport because, as Paul noted, the county only has a certain amount of control over what happens at the airport. The FAA really controls much of what happens there. But what the county does control are two things. Number one, the facilities. If you build a facility there, you must let that facility get used. And the county also has control with this special set of limitations on airlines out of the main passenger terminal that gets grandfathered in under current law because, number one, it existed before 1990, and number two, because the terminal capacity has been agreed to be what it is, and therefore the terminal is not able to accommodate unlimited flights beyond that.
Okay.
So what we have here now is a decision that takes a whole category of flights in and out of the airport and takes it out of the limited piece that the county controls through those special limitations I just mentioned, and puts all of that activity, both current, which, as Paul said, is limited, but also future activity, into a part of the airport that the county has no control over in terms of volume. And we're going to have to see what happens going forward.
Okay, well, let's get into some of those questions. My first question is, are there now any county-imposed limits on operations from the FBOs? Paul, you want to start with that?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there are leases that the county has with the FBOs, and I mean, I think people might have heard of the Millionaire, litigation. It was over a lease, which I think is getting resolved. And so, the FBOs have to lease the space from the county, and these are very extensive and lengthy lease documents they have to execute. And in those leases, the county, can impose certain conditions on how they operate, and in terms of how big they can get. Physically, there's not much they can do in terms of how many flights because um, light general aviation, which is 80% of the airport, utilization, is out of FBOs. So that's really a big part of what the airport does.
Right.
Excuse me.
Peter, anything to add to that?
Yeah, not too much. I mean, just people should be aware, again, as you said, closer to 85% of the flights in and out of the airport take place using facilities other than the main passenger terminal that most residents are familiar with. That includes the FBOs, which might also be called private terminals. There's corporate hangars as well, and some other types of facilities that get used around the airport. And yeah, the bottom line is the only, other than specific provisions in the leases that can't really be restrictive, the only limitation is that the facility, the county has to allow the facility to be used up to the maximum safe capacity of that facility. Millionaire that Paul mentioned actually took a hangar for small private aircraft out of commission and was forced to put it back in commission by the FAA, leaning on the county. So if you build it, you must let them come.
Okay.
A good line. Yeah.
Yeah, it's there. The second question I had was the FAA, the county aside, the FAA itself has regulations that govern some aspects of FBO operations. For example, they require operators to fly smaller planes with fewer than 30 passengers. Is that restriction been affected by this recent court decision since it's incorporated in the FAA's own regulations?
No, I mean that stands. I mean, and the XO and JSX flights are all under 30 people. They're more than nine, and they're under 30. I think XO actually flies, I think, under 20 people. JSX has slightly larger planes, so they might be closer to 30. But that doesn't change, and I think people are wondering, because one of the issues was you can buy seats on these planes like you would at JetBlue or United or any other airline. And so people were wondering, well, hey, if it's a public for sale, why are they not regulated and in the terminal like everybody else? And these are because these operators operate under a different set of rules. They're called Part 135s. So they have a different, basically, operating certificate. They're considered public charters. And so I know that that's a fine term of a legality that people would find frustrating, but it is a difference, and I think that as opposed to what's the JetBlue and American Airlines are Part 121s, and so they have just a different operating certificate. But the other issue, though, which is interesting, and I think people who use the terminal can appreciate, is one of our positions or concerns was why would the county want to be directing more traffic into an already overcrowded terminal? I mean, anyone who has used Westchester County Airport, and all of us have, that waiting area is too small. It's overcrowded. It's not a pleasant experience. And, one of the beauties about flying out of Westchester is it is more civilized than LaGuardia or Kennedy, and it's a lot more convenient for those of us who live in Westchester. And so, we thought it was a little counterintuitive to say, let's take all of these flights and stick them in the terminal with everybody else, and then it would have been, really, we think it would have been complete pandemonium. But anyway, the county felt that, of course, they could handle it because of the limitations on the gates and the 240 passengers per half hour. But
Okay.
in any event, the short answer to your question is no. I mean, the restriction remains in place, and no one is unhappy about that. No one is challenging that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would also, again, commend Paul, you and your firm, for handling this case in a way that did not disturb, or directly undermine the the special grandfathered limitations that we still have at the main passenger terminal. Um, that's whenever you touch one of those Jenga towers, you don't know what's going to fall down. So kudos for managing it, in a way that, I guess, from my point of view, limited the damage. But
Yeah.
you know, the the idea is this: the county, when the county codified their restrictions in law in 2004, um, it was understood and assumed. And I went back and interviewed the chief architect of that, who was um, one of our former county legislators, um, and Marty Rogowski. And it's a long time ago, and the guy's been out of office for a while, so I'm not going to hold him to a photographic memory. Um, so it was a little unclear exactly what prompted the revision in 2005, or the amendment in 2005. But as best as anyone can remember, there was certainly no intent to make a material change, but rather to clarify what had always been the case, which was, when these original rules were set up at the airport, it was to allow the airport to accommodate, to comfortably accommodate modern commercial airline traffic. And all of that traffic came and went through uh, the main terminal at the time. And that continued when the current terminal, was built in the 90s. So the practice has been consistent, and it really was sort of a non-issue until these airlines, that Paul's firm represented, started flying flights with more than 10 passengers, selling seats to the public like any other airline, and claiming that, due to a bit of a paper shuffle, that they should be exempted from the limitations of all the other airlines, and subjecting the communities around to what in the future could become a significant category of new small but also medium-sized jet traffic in and out of the airport.
Okay. But as you said, Peter, the county has agreed or has said it doesn't plan to have any appeals on this decision.
Well, I mean, it's gone to the Court of Appeals, so the only appeal now would be to the Supreme Court.
Right.
And
So we kind of are where we are.
we are where we are. We should appreciate where we are. So, I'm not looking to relitigate this. It's just about helping people appreciate why it was an issue, and gauge what the ultimate impacts could be, but also to understand what won't be impacted. So, as Paul said, we don't the limitations at the main terminal remain in place, and that is of real comfort.
Okay. It sounds like the only real constraints on operations from the FBO is, as Paul referenced, this Part 135 restriction on 30 passengers and smaller planes. Other than that, it doesn't seem to be too many restrictions imposed by the FAA. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean the FAA doesn't impose a lot of restrictions. I mean the restrictions that would impact all of the, I'm going to say, non-commercial air traffic is going to be the physical limitations at the airport, meaning the size of the FBOs, the amount of gasoline that they can provide for these airlines, the amount of personnel they can do to provide maintenance for the airlines, and I don't know, because I don't own an airplane, how much of that. There are people on the airport advisory board who are airplane owners who actually fly out of the airport as a recreational thing. And so, they could probably tell you better than I could what's going on out there, but it doesn't seem to me that it's overcrowded. Like those said, there's plenty of capacity for. In fact, well, actually, this partially came out during the litigation as we had deposed people, and one of them was the chairman of the airport advisory board at the time, and he said there is plenty of capacity for more. I would say non-commercial, traffic in and out. So I'm guessing that there is room there for people with the corporate jets, the private airplanes, and then of course, these I'm going to call these small commercial operators. So yeah, I mean, I think the only limitations are what's there physically. I don't think we're building any more hangars. I don't think we're building any more, facilities. And I don't think anyone has come in and asked that we do that, other than Millionaire, who wanted to expand their facility. And I don't know if they're going to get to do that or not.
Yeah, well, right. That you hit the nail on the head. I don't think there's a lack of desire. We're actually entering a period where a significant number of the structures at the airport are kind of getting towards, or in some would say past their intended lifespan. And we've already seen, in addition to Millionaire, who successfully took advantage of a time when airport neighbors were not monitoring things as closely as we realized we should, and got the county to renew their lease with permission to both expand their terminal tremendously and build a large new terminal for larger private jets. But they're now but they've been in litigation to do the same at a second terminal. Now they've lost that litigation as far as I've heard on the airport advisory board. That has been settled, and Millionaire has backed off its and relinquished its claims, although they haven't relinquished their right to start over again. And in the meantime, actually the largest single operator at the airport is a company called NetJets. And NetJets is like a fractional share, fractional ownership share company for jets. It's almost like
For rich people.
Yeah, buying a week at a vacation, at a vacation resort.
Like a
So yeah,
time.
rich people who don't want to buy a whole plane can invest in NetJets and then utilize this fleet of private aircraft with a limited number of members. They're the largest, I believe, single operator of jets in and out of the airport. They have two old buildings down the street from the main terminal that a couple of years ago they brought to the airport advisory board their desire to knock those down and replace them with two significantly larger buildings, of course, with assurances that there was no desire to increase traffic in and out of the airport. They just wanted a safer, more efficient, space to operate from. But when you apply the "if you build it, you must let them come" principle that governs airports, the big question on our minds was, well, okay, if we give them permission if the county gives them permission to build them, and their demand increases, even taking into account that their original intentions may have been, completely harmless. What's to stop them from saying, well, these larger facilities can accommodate more aircraft and things have changed and we need to do that? At that point, it's very questionable whether the county would have any way of pushing back on that.
All right. So the county main levers of control are physical capacity at the airport, not so much flights taking off, but these hangar facilities. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
for the FBOs and for light general aviation, which is what we call everything but the commercial airlines. Yes, that's an accurate statement. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, let's move on. So This recent court decision, do you think it could have any impact on airline operations at the main passenger terminal? Did the 2005 amendment affect main terminal operations relative to what all parties agreed in the 2004 Terminal Use Procedures Law?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the operations and the lottery with the Part 121 operators, the commercial carriers will go continue unimpeded. And I think most of them have signed up on new TUPs or in the process of doing that. So I don't think there was anyone saying, "Hey, let's challenge the 2004 law because we knocked out the 2005 amendment." I mean, I think that's fine. So no, I don't think there'll be any changes at the terminal other than what the county may or may not do as far as A, the master plan, and B, the RFP that they just put out to have the inside of the terminal, I guess I'm going to say renovated, for lack of a better term. That'll have much more impact than anything else that's related to this decision.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, had the decision gone the other way, there would have been impacts on the terminal because you'd have the same four gates and 240 passengers per half hour. And now these additional airlines would have, and the county and the existing airlines would all have had to figure out a way to accommodate to that. So I don't think it's the terminal that's going to be impacted, but the big question is this: for the last few years, everything's been in litigation. So quite naturally, these other charter airlines have limited their investment at the airport. They've maintained, or at least some of them have maintained, these sort of beta testing, small operations. Now that there's a legal green light, the question is, will they ramp up, taking advantage of that capacity in other parts of the airport that Paul was alluding to earlier? And if they do, will that amount to and accumulate to something that's going to materially degrade, our the communities and the enjoyment of property and public health, et cetera, around, not to mention the threat to the reservoir that each aircraft represents, especially larger ones with the jet fuel, et cetera. So that's what we're going to have to see. With respect to the terminal itself, if I could just take the opportunity to point out, especially as we're about to head into, or we're already in the busy holiday season, when you talk about congestion at the terminal, what you need to realize is two things. Number one, there's at least, when you spoke, John, about certain holiday periods where the limitations are lifted, those are more extensive than people realize. I mean, they amount to, I forget exactly, but it's at least 70 or 80 days a year. And during those times, congestion at the terminal is really a function of the airlines making business decisions to disregard the official capacity of the terminal to handle passengers, because legally the county can't prevent them from doing that. So it's not the terminal that is at fault for this. It's the airlines who are, again, they know what the terminal capacity is. They abide by it for the rest of the year, but they make a choice to crowd us into that terminal by offering additional flights when they can. And, again, people should just understand where that's coming from.
Right. Now, that's an interesting aspect too, Peter, because what that, of course, gets to is a different question, really. It's the demand for airline services. I mean, the reason I don't know, I wasn't here when this happened, but the reason they probably have these holiday periods is because more people want to fly, and the county decided it ought to accommodate them.
Yeah, well, again, these
I don't
rules
know
go
the
all the
history.
way back to the 1980s,
Oh,
and
yeah,
I wasn't a fly, I wasn't there to overhear the conversations. I'm sure demand plays into it, has always played into it.
they want to
Uh,
make money. I mean, the airlines want to make money. I mean, this is a business. So yes, I mean, this is a supply and demand. These are peak flying times. So the airlines, made the pitch. Look, this is where we make a lot of money, and we don't want to be hamstrung by some of these. We need some areas where we can do it. I mean, I think Peter makes a very good point though. And this is something I wasn't even aware of, at least until recently, because I had remembered from my county legislator days that it's a lot of days. We think the holidays it's 2 days at Thanksgiving or a few days at Christmas or it's a lot of days. It's more than you would think that we lay people consider holidays. So that Peter's right. That does contribute to some of the congestion in the terminal. Yeah.
The point I was getting at, just to clarify, is not, yes, the airlines want to carry more passengers. They prefer these periods be extended even further. But the county is willing to accommodate that need. So that to me was an interesting point because the county's residents, let's say, are the source of the demand, and the county decided that it would accommodate that demand. So
No, it's not just the counties. There are people from Greenwich. Obviously, if you look at the parking lot, you see a lot of Connecticut plates. So yeah, and there's a lot of demand for using the airport for a lot of reasons. And so I think it's not just and county government is not hostile to the airport. I mean, they've
right.
actually are pretty very supportive of it. I think it generates a lot of revenue for the county, and so I think county government is trying to maintain that balance, which is very challenging for them because they understand the value of having the airport. It's good for business. It attracts businesses because it's there and businesses need it. And I think, the consumers, those of us who live here, use the airport. I think those of us who live near the airport, and all three of us live within a mile of the airport. I mean, Peter even closer. Are just concerned about the impacts. And I think the greater impact to me, I mean, the noise is an impact, and I get that. But the environmental issues are, I think, very compelling, and I don't think they're always given the attention that they deserve. But I
Right.
know that over the years, there's been issues about, the de-icing fluid and those materials that they're spraying out all winter long. Whatever they're putting on the runways, whether it's the salt or the brine or whatever they use, the oil, the gas, a lot of the fluids that are running out of these. I mean, those things are all running into the groundwater, and so those are the issues that I think are actually have serious quality of life implications. But the noise, we all live with. I grew up in, around the corner from a fire station back in the day when they had a fire whistle going off every time there was a fire. That was before there were pagers and there were cell phones. And so people would say, how do you, I said, you get used to it. When there's a fire, you hear that, and I was like, you just kind of get used to it. I'm getting used to some of the planes. I mean, some days are worse than others. And I think, you pointed out sometimes it's how the wind and the different patterns, on the takeoffs and the landings. But I think the environmental issues are actually more serious in some respects.
I agree completely. That's why, at the beginning of this, I think the fundamental fact that we all need to keep in mind is that we have a legacy uh, mismatch between a facility and the environmental risks of it being located where it is. Um, Certainly close to many residential areas, but of course, those have grown up around the airport over time. Um, but even more so with the reservoir. And there have been multiple documented instances of various kinds of pollutants, um, getting into or threatening that reservoir, including right now where the whole airport is legally a state brownfield under New York State Department of Environmental Conservation monitoring and supervision because of PFAS chemicals. We don't need to get into all of that, but
Right.
Paul's absolutely right. And then there's the airborne component of the particulate matters and fumes and everything else that comes from the airport that affects the neighbors and everyone under the flight path, not just immediately around the airport. And then there's the larger sustainability issues of air traffic, and in particular, the kind of I hate to say it, but the kind of low density private air traffic that arguably Paul's clients represent at least one end of the spectrum. Obviously there are planes with one person in it, and that would be the other end of the spectrum. But air travel is has a whole different environmental footprint than other types of travel, and within air travel, you can distinguish significant differences between the main public airlines and then other types of more private and exclusive jet traffic. So I agree completely.
Okay. Let's move on to what if there are any other potential consequences of this recent court decision. And here I'm thinking about what you had mentioned earlier, Peter, about the potential for increased helicopter flights. Is that an outgrowth of this decision or in any way related to it? Or was that going to happen if this decision had gone the other way?
Yeah, I don't think the decision is driving, increased helicopter traffic, but I think, what you're seeing in both cases is the same kind of, it's the same dynamic where we have special limitations that I think, should jealously guard on, airline use of the terminal building. And then we have the rest of the airport and everything that happens there, for which our only means of controlling or restricting growth is to restrict the facilities. So, and I think that there's going to be in the coming years, there's going to be a lot of proposals relating to those other facilities, and they're probably not going to be as blatant as what happened with Millionaire asking to build a bunch of extra hangars, or demanding, I should say. They're going to be couched in terms of modernization. They're going to be couched in terms of safety. We need bigger. We don't want bigger facilities for the sake of making the airport busier and noisier and more polluting. Not at all. We want bigger facilities to enable us to operate more safely, more in a more environmentally friendly way. We're going to put green roofs and solar panels on the roof, and more economically, which is going to have some energy savings, et cetera. This is the language you're going to hear, but at the end of the day, it's going to be extremely easy for things to get approved, even with the best of intentions. Again, the unintended consequence is going to be the ability to scale up operations down the road. And, we'll see what happens with the helicopters. There have been times when there's been more traffic or less traffic. And it's not going to stop with helicopters. We're going to have electric versions of airborne people movers before too long. And the bottom line is you got to be careful, and we really have to demand that the county does its homework, because once it's done, the FAA is going to make sure that that everything can get used to the maximum capacity, whether we like it or not at that point.
Let me just ask a basic question for clarification. Do the helicopters use the FBOs, or is it some other type of arrangement?
Paul, do you want to take that, or shall I?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't see a lot of helicopter traffic. Are we seeing an increase in it? And it would only be there for, I'm not sure why, who's helicoptering in and why. Is it in lieu of
Blade?
Blade. I mean, other than Blade, I know Blade is doing them in New York City, though, they go from the helipad to the, LaGuardia and Kennedy. I didn't know if they were coming here or not. So
They've announced a new service to let people avoid the commute and come from Westchester to the helipad in New York City.
And so do you have any idea? I mean,
Yeah, no. So to your question, John, all traffic at the airport goes through a facility, right? There's no like open public space. So you either have to use the main terminal, or if you are a corporation, you can use your own hangar. Otherwise, you have to use an FBO. And so, yes, there are facilities at least some of the FBOs to accommodate helicopter traffic, and that's what's getting used. And my understanding is if the FBOs wanted to increase that or reconfigure to allow for more, they'd have to go through the county. And again, we're very fortunate in the sense that we have a county-owned airport, and that county government is as responsive to residents as I have seen it be over the last, close to 30 years. It has been the case repeatedly that when groups of residents felt strongly about something and banded together, they were able to influence county policy on the airport. And likewise, when that didn't happen, county policy on the airport went in a different, more business-friendly direction. So, but the fact that the onus is on us to do our part to advocate with the county is not a bad thing, because in almost every other instance you have you have special airport authorities or the kind of privatized long-term lease that a previous administration tried here in Westchester. When the airports are not in the hands of elected officials who are directly accountable to the voters, then we residents have far less influence on what happens there. So again, we're lucky with the influence that we have, and we need to use that influence responsibly.
Okay. So let me move on to more, just as a question for you guys, see if the most recent version of the terminal use agreements, which each airline signs to acknowledge the terminal use procedures law, expired last December. Is this a source of concern?
not for me. I mean, I don't think there's been any, as I mentioned earlier, there's really been no push from the carriers to, get out from under it or to litigate it. I think they've accepted it. I think the last conversations we've had, and I mean we meaning the Rye Brook Airport Advisory Board and the county, is that they're negotiating new agreements with the airlines. So I'm not, I'm not getting any red flags that there's any danger, that there's some issue. I think they're all fine with it. I think they may want to tweak it, and we don't know because they don't tell us. But I think if there were a concern, I think we would have heard by now, And I mean, the three of us on the airport advisor.
I wish I could be as copacetic as you about this, Paul. I've been in the trenches long enough to be a little, I don't know, you could say paranoid, you could say gun shy, but so I think that it is very likely that you're right, but I do think it's troubling that a year after the agreements expired, and 6 months after the county announced to the Airport Advisory Board that the text of new agreements had been finalized, the Airport Advisory Board, the village, individuals have no access to even a specimen copy of that language. And I know that the village was Rye Brook and Portchester, who provide emergency services with zero compensation to the passenger terminal at the airport, were hoping and had felt assured that the new agreements would provide the basis for fair compensation. I've heard reports that the initial information that's been shared, that's trickled out, has been disappointing in that regard. So again, we received some assurances about 6 months ago that at least the primary limitation, that the airlines were continuing to agree to the same basic limitations as before. But the devil sometimes is in the details, and I'm not going to rest easy until the county reveals the text of these new agreements.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it is clearly an unknown factor because these negotiations by their nature can't be public until the documents are signed, would be my guess. Okay, now let's see. Final question is, do you foresee any impact from this court decision on the airport's next master plan?
Well, we'd like to see the master plan before we can answer that question. I don't necessarily see a direct impact from the decision to the master plan, but all three of us have been on this in this hamster wheel with the county on the master plan. I mean, this goes back what 3-4 years, and then we were in the throes of it, and then COVID hit, and that was a very convenient excuse to say, well, we're going to shelve it, and then there were a series of elections, which of course, no one likes to do anything during election cycle. And so here we are, on the cusp of 2026, almost 6 years, after this process started, and we don't have a master plan. So that probably troubles me more than, what Peter was referring to on the TUPs. But, I don't know. I mean, I think, there's a new administration. So it started under George Latimer. Now it's Ken Jenkins. And I think there's a new consultant now involved. So I'm curious, what they're going to come up with. I know that at least again, as part of this litigation, we did depose a lot of these politicians, and we asked the question, how do you define airport expansion? And the standard answer was we define it by the physical plant growing. In other words, it doesn't get any bigger than it is now. But for those of us on the inside, that doesn't tell the whole story, because there's a lot of stuff you can do inside those four corners of the airport to grow. And so I think it's interesting, to say the least. But I don't think the decision is going to have an impact per se. I just think we're all kind of curious as to what the master plan is going to come up with.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Paul, including the hamster wheel. It's a good metaphor. Sadly, just to be precise, there is a master plan. It was submitted by the administration. Well, it's actually submitted at the beginning of of Latimer's administration, after being developed in virtual secrecy by the preceding administration. Latimer came in and, based on widespread community disagreement with various aspects and dissatisfaction with aspects of that secretly devised master plan, Latimer basically said, look, the county is going to be fined massively by the FAA if we continue not to have one. So we're submitting it with a note to the FAA that says we're intent on revising it. And that attempt to revise it has been what has dragged on so long, for the various reasons, some more compelling and believable than others. But here we are. And so the one thing I will say is the county's most recent pronouncement on the master plan was that they were going to make sure that it incorporated the commitment Latimer made to have the projections for airport traffic and growth, to have those reflect the limitations that we still do have on airline traffic in and out of the terminal. The existing master plan doesn't. And so that creates this sense that the airport's going to grow and need even more things, and thereby justifying more building and development and expansion at the airport. If we take that out of the equation and get a revision in that takes that out of the equation, then presumably the needs to grow things inside, at the airport, as opposed to, as Paul said, changing the borders, the boundaries, would be significantly less. And that would be a good thing. So we're still waiting,
Thank you, John. I have to sort of get going here.
All right. So let me say, if anybody have any brief final comments, otherwise we can wrap this up. Everybody, I think, has had a chance to state.
No, it's been very helpful. I appreciate you doing this, because I think it helps people understand a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on at the airport. And I know it can be overly technical.
Yeah, look, the main thing is for people to just, not think they have to be experts, but to stay aware, stay vigilant, stay ready to, voice your interests, so that, the watchdogging that is taking place can be effective on all our behalfs. Nobody wants to see the airport. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but, the position of the village has consistently been that, the airport, we want to be a good neighbor to the airport. The airport needs to be a good neighbor to us. And the position of the county has been, and, even recently there was a new resolution passed that the county is not just concerned with the boundaries of the airport, but the county legislature's policy is that there should be no increase in the infrastructure of the airport to essentially tamp down on operations there and the environmental threats that come with it. So we just gotta hold everybody's feet to the fire to those positions, and and be glad that we do have, and be glad about the positives that the airport does deliver to our community economically and, in terms of convenience, et cetera. So we want to try to have our cake and eat it too.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you, Paul. Thank you, Peter. I think very lucky to have two such well-informed people talking about these issues. So thank you very much.